everybody. Mark Levin here. Well, I want to tell you why I wasn't here the last few weeks. First, I want to tell you about my father. Now, many of you probably feel like you know my dad in many respects. I've talked about him a lot, and my mother. You know, my father wrote and illustrated 6 books, starting at the time he was 85 years old. And his last book comes out on October 30th. And he had written and illustrated a book in 1965. He was an artist. He's an author. Very small businessman. Most of all, he was a patriot. You know, this first book, Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address Illustrated, there's a preface that I wrote. And in order to write it, I interviewed my father. I don't mean formally, but I needed to know more about him and our family. I learned a lot. On July 4, 1937, my father, Jack, was 12 years old, and a neighborhood buddy, he and they, and the two of them, walked several miles from their homes to the parade route where the city of Philadelphia was celebrating our nation's founding. And the route stretched from Center City, Philadelphia, not too far from Independence Hall, to the Philadelphia Art Museum, which Sylvester Stallone would make famous in his Rocky movies many years later. One of the dignitaries in the parade caught my father's attention, a Civil War veteran. A Civil War veteran. And he sat on the back of a 4-door convertible dressed in his old Union uniform, including his campaign hat. My father remembered it vividly. And behind him marched a small group of Spanish-American War veterans. But of all the soldiers, the veterans, the marching bands my father saw that day, that Union soldier stood out. And young Jack had read somewhat about the Civil War in school, but seeing that soldier in the flesh intrigued him. The soldier would become seared in my father's mind. The most costly war in American history had become real to him. Thus began my father's lifelong journey of self-education and patriotic preaching about this great nation's history and founding principles. Now, at a young age, my father had a knack for drawing, designing, and inventing. When he was 13, he designed an automobile window invention for a contest the Philadelphia Daily News was conducting in conjunction with the release of the movie Young Tom Edison, starring Mickey Rooney. He was one of only 5 winners citywide and earned a trip to the 1939 New York World's Fair. At 15, he submitted an idea with drawings for animating the story Christmas Carol to the Walt Disney Studio in California. The studio loved it. Then they asked that he provide more examples of his work, including humorous cartoon drawings, and he did. Then they contacted Jack's parents, my father's parents, my grandparents, and asked whether they would allow their son, 15 at the time, to join Disney Studio. They would provide him with dormitory space and schooling at their facility while he was working for them. But his parents, concerned about his age, turned down the offer. Now, my father grew up during the Great Depression. His family was very poor. His father, Harry, worked at part-time jobs when he could find them, often as a bartender. His mother, my grandmother, Sarah, worked in a cigar factory. Jack was the eldest of 4 children and the only boy. And when he turned 16, after the school day ended, he would walk to the cigar factory about a mile from their home, apartment, if you will, where he worked until midnight, earning the going rate of $17 a week. On the weekends, my father took freelance jobs with furniture frame manufacturers, sketching frames to upholster sofas and chairs. He had no formal background in any of this. He was paid $2 for a set of 3 drawings. The manufacturer's salesmen used the finished drawings with their customers. A few months later, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Jack spent the summer working at the Cramps shipyard in Philadelphia, where they built destroyers and submarines. But he wanted to do more for the war effort. Like so many wonderful young men at the time, my father decided to enlist in the armed forces. He wanted to be a cadet in the Army Air Corps, which today we know as the Air Force. But he was only 17. He was too young. So he got a copy of his birth certificate from City Hall. He rubbed out the 5 in 1925, his birth year, and he wrote in a 4. Just like that, he'd reached the legal age requirement of 18. Now, if he could pass the rigorous Air Corps exam, he was in. 10 would-be cadets took the exam, including students from the University of Pennsylvania. But only 4 passed, including my father. And not long thereafter, as my father was boarding a train to Biloxi, Mississippi for basic training, a soldier stopped him and told him the lieutenant wanted to see him. The lieutenant, who had taken a close look at the birth certificate, asked Jack how old he was. Well, my father told him the truth. The lieutenant wasn't very happy, but he told him when he turned 18, he could join up. And a week after he turned 18, he joined up. And while in service, Jack would use brief respites to draw cartoons, which were published in a variety of newspapers. After the war, my father worked for a company making displays for store windows and trade shows. Around this time, he met a beautiful young lady, Norma Rubin. And the next morning, Jack told his mother that one day he would marry her. She was 17. Norma headed to Syracuse University, and so did Jack, with help of the GI Bill. He earned his room and board by working in the cafeteria. But Jack's love of art and history would lure him back to his hometown of Philadelphia. And after much pleading by Jack, Norma returned with him, and they were soon married thereafter. My mother was a brilliant student. She graduated from Arcadia University with a Bachelor of Science degree, and they began teaching, she did, 4th and 5th graders in public school. My father enrolled in Philadelphia College of Art, where he majored in advertising and began experimenting with new ideas, in particular unique drawings and images of clowns. Well, it goes on. Eventually, they would start a nursery school and day camp. My father would build all the toys, the desks, and the chairs with his hands. He was a hell of a carpenter. And for the camp, he would maintain the pools. He'd strip them down every summer and paint them all by himself. He would mow the lawns all by himself until his sons were old enough to help him. And he'd get up at dusk, and he'd work till dawn. And so would my mother. They worked like hell. They worked hard, 20-hour days. You know, if you go to the Reagan Library, there's a portrait there of President Reagan that John Highbush placed on a wall. I remember it was 2011, October 1, when we went there. He was so honored. He adored Reagan. My father was a super patriot. Everything I am, everything I do, is because of my mother and father. After every radio show, my father would call me and he'd critique the show. And I was always the greatest radio host ever. My appearances on Fox, he really enjoyed them, particularly on Hannity. He said, "That's the way to get him, kid." He's very worried about the future of this country. During the Republican primaries in 2016, I was backing Cruz early on. He liked Cruz too. But then one night he called me and said, "Why the hell are you so tough on Trump?" I said, "You know what, Dad, maybe you're right." He said, "I like that guy. I like that guy." My dad was very excited about the book coming out on October 30th. I'm not hawking it, I'm just telling you. He was very concerned about the way our police had been treated by President Obama, by Attorney General Holder, by all these organizations. He was very upset about it. And like his other books, he was trying to provide lessons for young people about Americanism and supporting our institutions and supporting people who are upholding those institutions. And so his last book is called Our Police. And you can see he illustrated it. And it's a beautiful book. And he was also in the middle of writing his next book on the Declaration of Independence, illustrating it for young children, too. So, now you know why I was gone. Because my father passed away last Monday from cancer. And as I embarrass myself here, he will be gravely missed by me and my family. And I want to thank you. He adored you too. He adored my audience. He's very proud of his son. He's very proud of all you patriots out there too. I'll be right back. All right. Folks, do me a favor. Don't call me about this. I appreciate each and every one of you, but we got to plow ahead. That's what he would want. That's what I want to do. We're going to plow ahead. And I saw some of what President Trump was saying during the break. I'll tell you, he's one of a kind. And we're going to miss him greatly when he's no longer president. I'm telling you right now, we will. He fights back. He speaks plainly. You know, when Harry Truman was president of the United States, he would speak in plain terms. He would use curse words from time to time. He would do all those things, right? And the Democrats and the left and the media praised him. Plain talking, plain speaking Harry. So we have a plain speaking, plain talking Donald. He does it on Twitter. He does it on a campaign trail. And he's trashed. We're going to miss him after his second term is over. We are. My dad was right about him. And he used to crack up my dad, as he does me, because nobody gets under the skin of a leftist or a media type, one and the same, like Donald Trump. And that's one of the reasons you love him, isn't it? He doesn't give as good as he gets. He gives better, 10 times better, and it drives them nuts. And it drives them nuts. You do not have to agree with everything Donald Trump does. But one thing you do know, he loves his country. And while you might and I might disagree with him here and there, we agree with him the vast majority of the time, and we know his heart's in the right place. We know that's not true with Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. We know that's not true with Jake Tapper and Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo. We know that's not true with the miscreants and malcontents who work at the New York Times and the Washington Post. This man loves our country. And you can see it and you can hear it. And his nominees to the federal bench have been outstanding. Have been outstanding. The left tries to paint him as mentally deranged. And the media takes the lead in this. The media really leads the Democrat Party. It's not the other way around anymore. The Democrat Party is the political wing of the modern media. Remember I said that. So when the backbenchers say, you can say, wait a minute, I heard that somewhere else. It's true. The media lead the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party actually follows the media talking points. They're not even one and the same anymore. The Democrat Party is the lapdog for the American media. The president knows that. You know it, and I know it. And they get furious when you criticize them. I want to remind the people in the media that we have freedom of the press. No thanks to them. Thanks to those men who they denounce all the time. And I did say men. Those men who they denounce all the time who founded this nation. We have freedom of the press. They died for freedom of the press. But there's also this phrase, freedom of speech. The rest of us get to speak too. We may not have printing presses. We may not have blog sites. We may not have Bezos spending billions of dollars to build us up and so forth and so on. But we have the right to speak too. And that includes the right to criticize the media. It's interesting, the media have no problem criticizing their competitors. CNN actually has a host whose entire job is to trash Fox. Brian Stelter, who's a scumbag, by the way. And I say that with all due respect. His entire show is based on attacking conservative media, attacking Fox. That's all he does. That's okay. But when you and I call them out, then we're dangerous. We're fascistic. We're like dictators. No, we're not. We're the ones who believe in the Bill of Rights. We're the ones who believe in the Constitution. And I do think after his second term, we are going to miss Trump a great deal. Because, among other things, he's shaking things up. And things need to be shaken up. Very, very badly. Very, very badly. You know Trump loves the country. Can you really say that about all these media people who bring on these guests who trash the country? Who use racism to trash the country? Who call Trump supporters names? No, you can't.